Namaste and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our continuing series Evenings with Sraddhalu. Namaste.
Namaste and welcome to everybody.
We are happy to continue today part 12 on the same topic with dreams, visions, exteriorizations, out-of-body experience. And today more on the study of mother's advices on developing these capacities. But first, we will be taking a few questions from the last sessions. And these questions are related with the descent of peace. And the first one from Jason. During the Visions, Dreams, and Out-of-Body series, you mentioned many times the importance of the descent of peace practice. I have done this repeatedly over the past year or so and have found that I have started to appreciate the blankness underlying my thoughts and feelings. However, every time I try to move my attention up to my head, I feel a pressure build up in my head, and it feels most unnatural and disruptive. Would I hope for the natural developing of sensing the psychic presence just from staying with this blankness in the heart of my body? If I can hold an intention and aspiration to invite the presence to come through? How important is the top-down movement? Is it something which could happen spontaneously when I'm more ready?
Yes. So we have prioritized all the questions which relate to the practice so that all those of you who are in the movement of practice can use this opportunity while we are on this theme to have certain important experiences that we would like everyone to be able to have. The first point though of Jason's question is about this feeling of the pressure building on the head, and it feels, he says, most unnatural and disruptive. And the natural tendency for him is to wait for the presence of the psychic or the divine presence within the heart. The first thing to realize is these are two different movements, at least in the beginning. There is an inward movement when you go deeper, or where you go towards the psychic influence deeper, you approach it, or you wait on the surface, inviting its influence, and its influence gradually begins to flow out. Or there is both. You go in and then you come out with its influence. This is one movement, and this will change completely your sense of who you are. The I, your ego center, which is the superficial false I, will align more closely to the psychic influence, and the center, which is more truly your I, and so on. But in itself does not lead to a transformation of your nature. If the goal is transformation of nature, the upward movement and the descent from above is essential. And therefore, the two are required. A transformative movement of a descent from above would have difficulties if there was not enough influence of the psychic already settled in your nature, which would allow the nature to turn easily and allow itself to be transformed. So both the descent and the inward movement, both are needed, and they are complementary. Of these, for I would say everybody here, the basic inward influence of your aspiration and the psychic influence at a basic level is already present. If that is there, everything becomes easier. The more that grows strong and complete, the more everything becomes easier. But Sri Aurobindo emphasizes this simply because when someone does not have it, and there is only an attempt to grow in consciousness for the ascent or the descent, with your primary drive being in the ego center, problems which can be avoided if the psychic influence is highlight the importance of the upward movement. And just as here there is a two-sided movement in the inward, upward also there is a two-sided movement. Your consciousness rising to the center above the head and even higher up and opening to what is above is the movement of liberation. And the higher consciousness experienced above then descending into you, part by part, all the way down, is the transforming movement. Both are necessary. this double movement. And often it will be a movement of rising upward, followed by a descent, or simply centering yourself in your existing consciousness with an upward opening and waiting with an invocation for the descent to begin, which may begin naturally and often instantaneously, even if it's gentle at first. If you want to, and if you feel yourself so naturally drawn, the better movement would be a rising followed by a descent. If you do not feel the rising movement so comfortable, you can simply hold with an upward turn, not simply remaining in the head center. That's not enough. It does not bring a higher grade of consciousness which would transform. This being said, to Jason's observation that he feels a pressure build up and it feels unnatural and disruptive, only to the consciousness which is not habituated because of its novelty. In fact, the moment you have turned up, you feel the pressure build up. The pressure is the presence above the head that is gently beginning to descend already. And you have simply to allow it or lead it even. And it feels unnatural because it's too intense, too wide, too strong, too different from your narrowness and your little bubble of identity. Instead, if you stay at this point above head, either if you're within head, turn up, or ideally settle above head directly and turn up. And as you feel the pressure build up, dwell on the presence from which the pressure is felt. Dwell on it until you begin to feel it as a vivid presence. And the pressure is only its descent. Always the pressure represents something pressing against a resistance. If you release the resistance and open out, the pressure becomes a pleasant, dense descent. So what you do at that point as you feel the pressure, you relax your consciousness, open and widen to receive it. And let it, allow it, invoke it to slowly descend. Slowly penetrate, filling, surrounding your whole consciousness, and then let it be layer by layer. Often in the beginning you will feel a dense layer up to here, head, sometimes to the chest, because these are the more receptive parts, but then you must consciously take it all the way down to the feet. So if you're following the guided meditation for the descent of peace, this whole movement of centering and holding the awareness above and then gradually consciously invoking it down is already woven into that guidance. And when you feel the pressure, take it as the sign of the presence itself descending. Relax your consciousness, open and widely open, or simply relax and let it flow down. That would be the natural way. And so this will be essential, and the result of it will be the peace you will experience will have a density and an intensity which was quite extraordinary, and even you will experience its transforming effect on your consciousness. Within days, many things begin to shift within you. But yes, you can choose to center more in the heart and hold an intention and aspiration to invite the presence. That could be done even more effectively once the descent of the peace is felt, because your consciousness already interiorizes sufficiently. You're feeling your subtle body. In the awareness of the subtle body, already the inward movement becomes 10 times, 100 times more easy than if you started with the focus on the physical body and tried to go in. So yes, you can wait for it to happen spontaneously, but when it begins to happen, just because it is unusual, do not resist it. Instead, allow it, recognize it for what it is. You also mentioned the blankness underlying the thoughts and feelings. That's a good thing. But when you experience this very dense descent of peace, you'll experience it as a solid peace. And that will be something extraordinary. Your thoughts and feelings will completely still when you're concentrated in the peace. And that's when you'll find the effectivity far greater. I'm not sure if you're following the particular practice which I have recommended for the guided meditation. There are two which are online. One which is of 35 minutes, one which is of 55 minutes. I would recommend to follow the one which is of 55 minutes, which is much more detailed. So yes, I think that answers Jason's question. The next few questions also relate to this practice, so we can go to the next.
Revati, a few days ago when I was doing my descent of peace meditation, I was experiencing palpitations so much so that I couldn't concentrate. Then I discovered that I could concentrate my energy in the heart region, and an invisible hand, as if could actually close in and stop. My palpitations magically disappeared. Interestingly, I tried it once again when not meditating and could not achieve the same results.
Yes. You experience the calm of the influence from within, which instantly extinguishes any such disturbance. It was easy the first time because you were already in a partially interiorized state because of the focus on the descent. And being in the interiorized state, the access to the inner ranges is also more easy, its influence also more directly felt, and so on. What you can do if you ever find this kind of palpitation, instead of fighting it, you make yourself very quiet. You observe the palpitation is there in some superficial part of you. You become very quiet and become aware of the quietness behind. Recall the presence and the peace and the memory of it and shift your attention into this layer behind. The moment you have done this, there you will receive the influence either from within or from above, which will extinguish the palpitation. Notice though why the palpitation arises and see if you can address the root cause directly so that these things do not disturb you. And one of the methods you can use is recognizing the part within you from where this tendency rises. When you receive the peace descending or the influence from within, infuse it into that part and consciously, as if intending it to dissolve, until you feel that part thinning out and dissolving completely. And with the peace settled there, the tendency for that will be gone, the root itself having been dissolved. We can go to the next question.
I've lost you a few seconds, so
okay. Yeah,
shall I go for the
we
next
can hear
question?
you. Yes, Nikhil's question.
Nikhil, in parentheses, you mean subtle body? Should I identify myself with the subtle body?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So when we sit for meditation, at a very preliminary stage of any practice, you will find your tendency will be first to be aware of your gross physical body, or as they teach sometimes with the breath and other things. But they all tie you down to the surface layer. The whole goal of the meditation is precisely to go deeper, higher, and into other deeper states and ranges of consciousness. So to be able to disengage from your gross physical body is absolutely essential. And it's a practice which, if you can do consciously first, will give you an access which will be so much more complete, so much more easy, and even an access at will to inner and higher ranges. And this is one of the reasons why the out-of-body state is considered to be so effective, because your physical awareness is completely closed and your consciousness is free. But you don't need to go out of the body for this. Simply by shifting your awareness into the subtle body. And the first layer you encounter is the sense of the subtle physical. And this description is also embedded in that whole guided process. Hold your attention in that. When you feel this swollen form of the subtle physical body, hold your attention in that. Build your capacity to become aware of it and stay aware of it while engaged in activity. And if you have done that, then everything, all your inner and higher experiences are constantly available to you. When you allow yourself exclusively in the gross physical body identification, everything else as if gets extinguished, numbed, or closed and forgotten. Holding yourself in the layer closest to the gross physical, being the subtle physical, you have access to the gross body as well as the inner and higher ranges, and that becomes the link through which, in full waking awareness, you will have access to the inner and higher states and be able to act from them or receive their influence actively in the midst of action also. Though at first focus on holding this and opening to the inner and higher while in a eyes closed interiorized state. Thereafter, the slow opening of eyes, holding the awareness and then integrating with the surface body awareness is the link that you will build, from which all this becomes then easy. Next question.
Marin, when I started doing the descent of peace, the quality of my OB changed.
So in the out-of-body experience, the state into which you go first is the state in which you are living. in your normal habitual state of consciousness. I have recently, there was some question about one of the persons who speaks of his experiences, which is quite interesting, and I would like to share a little bit of that in one of the links which Geminus wanted us to all watch. Jürgen has made videos, visuals, using artificial intelligence of what the subtle worlds look like. And if you have read Savitri and Sri Aurobindo's description, then you will find it not too surprising. So there's a link which I will post later in the description, and it's a YouTube video of. But Jürgen had a conversation. I was just seeing some of this recently. He had a conversation with someone else whose name I've forgotten. And this other person who had out-of-body experience describes how one night he had eaten several pizzas and drunk a lot of alcohol. And then that morning, he finds himself in an out-of-body state in one of those dark lower worlds, where people who have passed on and are stuck in the lower ranges are, well, hanging around. And because he had had previous experiences of other levels, he knew how to get from the lower to the higher. And he began to look for a light. And there were those beings who were also looking for. They didn't know how to get out, how to shift to higher gradations of consciousness. But that's a different discussion, which perhaps we will look at later when we have a conversation with Geminus. The point I wanted to make was, why did he go into that state? And he says, because of the state he was in when he went to sleep. So the point is, out-of-body experience in itself may not give you the necessary capacity to go into higher ranges, as Mark pointed out. Unless you can go into the range, you cannot meet the person who is on that grade. So if you have not developed, for example, something of the gradations of the higher mind or the intuitive, then even while in the vital body, you would not be able to go into the zones of the vital worlds which correspond to the blending of the higher mind and the intuition into the vital. And so those worlds would be inaccessible because your consciousness is not developed on those grades. So it's very important to see the complementarity of the two movements. While the out-of-body state can amplify and assist your consciousness on the surface, the working in your waking state or in the meditative state, which is partially interiorized, and the ability to open and organize those gradations of consciousness would give you free access to those worlds and those gradations. And therefore the descent of peace as an experience and as a practice, as a point of practice through which you can deepen and heighten and integrate your gradations of consciousness, would be enormously helpful for using out-of-body experience as a means for the sadhana also. And so these two are going to be very complementary. We can go to the next two questions which can be read simultaneously.
Yes, two questions related on early mornings. Tutun, have noticed that an issue which is disturbing, challenging, the solution or answer comes during those few minutes when one is waking up early morning but not fully awake. And from Radha Kanta, I often get disturbed pre-wake up state. During sleep, I want to wake up but could not and feel helpless as I do not have control in me. Feels like if I could not get up, I will die due to breathlessness.
Yes, this state which is just before you wake up is very interesting. In conventional psychology, they refer to it as the hypnagogic state, where you are half into sleep or half out. It could happen in both movements. Generally, our sliding into sleep is automatic and unconscious, so we rarely can pause there. But on the waking up passage, one finds it easier to pause, or sometimes you find yourself stuck in that in-between state as Radhakanta describes. And this helplessness and unable to control is simply because part of you is in the subtle body, part of you is in the gross body. Being in the subtle, you can't move your gross physical, or being in the gross physical, you find yourself as if floating and not fully connected. And the panic is what is causing the breathlessness, because you think, oh, I don't have control, I'm unable to move, I'm frozen. This is what triggers the panic. The state itself is a very comfortable and relaxing state. Once you understand what it is, well, simply recognize, oh, I'm half in, half out. Choose at that point. You can either choose to slowly return fully integrate, something we discussed last time and from others' text. Or you may say, this might be the ideal opportunity to have an out-of-body experience, and simply choose to roll over or float away, or any of the movements which are described as methods of just floating off in that state. And you might just have the most spontaneous, effortless out-of-body experience. So play with it rather than fearing it, understand what it is and use it. And to Tutun's observation, it's important that often in that point when you are not fully awake, early morning, because you are in this in-between state, two things happen. Your consciousness, freed from the gross body, being more in the subtle body, has natural access to a freer, wider and a more true consciousness. Need not be spiritual, but it could be a higher spiritual also. So two things could happen. In that freer consciousness, suddenly your mind and your consciousness is naturally free to perceive, receive insights, receive intuitions and so on. So you get insights to the problems. Or it could be you went into some deeper or higher range of which you have no memory now, where you received the insight, and the insight is now held all the way to this half-waking state. If from this half-waking state where you recall the insight, you hold it and wake up slowly with the memory, you have the advantage. Or if you didn't and you just slipped into this waking state, with loss of memory, the insight would also be lost. So it could be either way. It could be an insight already gained that now you hold in that halfway state, and so you make a smooth transition to waking. Or you don't have the insight, but in that state you turn to receive an insight, and it's much more easy because you're not dulled by the gross body and the dulling effect of the physical brain. We go to the next question. Just before that, there are a couple of questions, observations in the chat box. Sumana says, while practicing the descent of peace, I feel the pressure as a sensation of pulsation like the heartbeat, followed by a descent of cool sensation. Is this the pressure which you mentioned? Yes, it could be felt as a pulsation. It could be felt as a steady, dense, almost like a solid presence. Or it could be felt as something very light, free, clear, bright. Whichever way you feel, do not worry. You simply are aware of something above the head, and then you feel it descending. And the descent is often felt, as you describe, the cool sensation. Because as the peace settles into the gross body, automatically the nerves become still, and that's a cooling sensation. But sometimes others feel it like a warming sensation, because what descends is so conscious, it brightens and wakes you up in a different way, so it feels like a warming or cooling or just a pleasant sensation which you can't describe. Whatever you experience is fine. So do not fixate on a particular description, which is the reason why in the guided process I've often used 2 or 3 words. Sometimes I use the word soothing, cooling or warming, but focus rather on soothing, which is quite neutral, and so whatever way you experience is fine. The pulsation need not always be felt. If you don't feel it, that's fine. Simply a pressure. Sometimes no pressure, just a presence, and it smoothly, effortlessly, without pressure flows in. Fine, whatever it is. Enjoy its denseness, let it grow more dense in the descent. And Dorian asks, I have great difficulties during the inward movement to meet with my psychic. I've watched the videos on the topic, but I have no feeling of the psychic. Could you expand on the practice and give more guidance? Yes, the descent of peace, and she says, I enjoy the descent of peace. So yes, after the descent, often the inward movement will be easy because your emotions are quiet. For the inward movement, you have a preconception of what the psychic movement should feel like. And that's why you feel that you're not receiving it. Most people make the mistake of thinking the psychic is like a gushing of joyous emotion. No, it's not. In fact, there is no emotion at all, because the psychic is not emotion, it is not thought, it is not physical body. So when there is something of the psychic influence, people say, oh, but I don't feel love, I don't feel what I thought the psychic should be. Well, let all that go. Instead, your reference is, V has made a comment, try the inward movement to meet the mother. Yes, that would be one way. Or simply become conscious of your deepest aspiration. You're aware of that. All of us are aware of that when we become quiet. And in that state with the deep peace, simply become aware that somewhere from deep within, there is this flow of a soft, gentle aspiration that grows. It could be you feel it as an aspiration, or you feel it as the love and gratitude or devotion that you feel towards the mother. And the source of that as a soft, gentle movement. It's very subtle and soft, but a very pure, soft warmth or a melting feeling or a soothing sensation in whatever way you feel. Do not preconceive. And it could be different on different days. But you feel that. Hold that as your reference. And then slowly concentrate into it as if it's a thread that flows from within. Or to use an analogy, water that flows from within a secret cave, and you catch the flow that comes out and you go back as if towards its source. By dwelling in that sensation, in that quality, and then going back towards its source. Stay immersed in whatever deep depth you are able to go in. Let that presence and influence grow. That's the psychic influence. Get familiar with it, and then let it flow all the way out to the surface. Each time that you do this, you'll find yourself going deeper and deeper. And there'll be a point where you will feel yourself in deep closeness to a sacred presence. Again, do not go by preconception. Allow the experience to lead you and stay in that deep presence in whatever way you experience it. You will know it. You'll feel you're in presence of something sacred and true and real. Let yourself get habituated to that as a second stage. And then eventually it will prepare you for the third stage where you will meet unveiled the psychic presence. But let that happen. Let it choose that. The first two movements is what you focus upon, and in a very relaxed movement of dwelling. So you may feel it as the part in you that turns to the mother, or you may conceive of the mother's presence as V has suggested. You can concentrate on the mother's presence within you and go deep as you can. And then stay immersed, and then allow the influence to flow out. That is the way you will build this capacity to go deeper and get habituated to that and build continuity. This is something I've mentioned many times before, with the influence that comes out. So that next time it's easy literally to slide in to the presence. So, okay, we go to the next question now.
On experiences, Bruno. Yesterday I was able to lie in a state of sleeping body but awakened consciousness. I was able to gently emit the intention to leave the body, and I felt that I was leaving like a very light body, like transparent smoke. It was great. I was able to get up, push with my hands and go through the window, then float to the first floor down. But I found myself in a setting that looked like a garden of my childhood and not my current home. Like a lucid dream. I skipped the rest of the experiment. Was this out-of-body experience that turned into a lucid dream, or a lucid dream from the beginning?
It's very interesting because you realize you're conscious. You're able to do what you want to do. You're not bound by anything. Unlike a dream where something is always pulling you, happening, and you are kind of led. Here you were very much in a state of conscious intention to be able to do what you want. And yet the setting was not what you expected. It was not your current physical reality. And that's fine. Do not worry. You are in a, what one would call a transition, very close to the full out-of-body experience. And this is how the form in which it takes place. It has a character which seems to be later on feels like a lucid dream, but in it you're conscious that you're there and you're doing something. And it's just on that brink, on the edge. And congratulations, you're very much on track. This is it, and let it grow, let it become more complete. So for some people, straight away you are out of the body in your vital body, and it's fine. Whichever grade. It need not be close to the physical world. It could be any of the gradations to which you are, and the world might seem different. But there is this, often it happens that you're in a kind of a half in out state, not yet fully into your own, and then it has this feel which is somewhat like a blend of a lucid dreaming state. But do not worry, this is something is happening, just allow it, trust the experience itself to lead you. And this is excellent. I would like more of you also to be able to, if you find as a result of these discussions and your practice things are opening, do share. It will be helpful and encouraging to others also. You can go to the next.
Amelie, you speak of your finger burning and the box scene in Dunes. as examples of training our consciousness through pain. Can we apply this to the emotional pain or life as a whole?
So it's not training the consciousness through pain. It was rather learning to manage pain in a certain way by taking precisely a poise of consciousness which was not pain. And then from there, since in the physical body I could not ignore the pain, just wait and allow it to be taken care of. It was an experiment I did. So certainly you can experiment, see what works if it helps. But the key point was, it's not that you identify with the pain and you say, now I'm suffering and through this I will grow. No, you will not grow through pain. You will grow only by finding a poise which is free of the pain, in which something greater and more true exists. So that should be the correction. So I am a little wary of what I sense in the question. Be very careful about this. It should not be self-indulgence. It should not be indulgence in the pain. It should not be identifying with the emotional pain and wallowing in it and waiting for something to happen. It has to be, and as I described in that state, a shift to something which is not pain. In this case for me it was the mind and the poise of mind as witness. You could find something deeper or higher or truer, and it depends on what you find, and from there the best would be ignore the pain, center yourself in that, and often you might find when you're centered there the pain is gone of its own. If you find the pain too strong and it still remains, it becomes peripheral, while centrally you do not have the pain, you have the greater freedom. And organize your life around this. Do not try to make the pain as a means for growth. That will not work. Rather, you're learning to deal with the reality of that pain, but on the basis of something deeper and freer from which you can live your life despite that pain, which then becomes either secondary, peripheral, or at some point even dissolved and non-existent. This would be the way forward, and that you can apply for emotional pain or even for life as a whole. Next.
To both, with the experiences available, is there any significance of the various karma cants? For example, Shrad, Tarpan, etc., if I
Yes.
pronounce correctly, that we do after our loved ones have left their bodies. Yes. Maybe you give us.
So these are the Sanskrit terms, karma kanda. These are practices, Shraddha and Tarpan. So Shraddha is the practice that both of these are practices done for people who have passed on. So there are some things done soon after the person has passed. There are things which are done a year later, and so on. The idea being that you are supposed to assist the person to move on in their journey, or to dissolve their ties to the physical world. Understand that all these were given with a certain occult knowledge, intended to help. Yes, they are all effective, they are all useful. Are they necessary? Depends on the person, depends on you. I will share this as an example which is quite remarkable from my own experience, because I have had very little experience of these kinds to do with people who have passed on. One of these was when Panditji's sister, younger sister, Mitraka, had passed on. This was, I think, in the year 2007 or so. And she had passed on. And at that time, Kumudben was working in the mother's room, and we could go and ask her, we could go to her, and she gave a rose flower, which I brought down, and Mitraka's body was still there. It had been a few hours, I think. And I was standing with the rose, we placed it on her chest, and then spontaneously, I was led to hold the rose near her nose, as if to get her to breathe. And instantly, I felt on some other deeper layer, as if her whole subtle body breathed in the presence, because the rose was carrying the presence from the mother's room. It breathed in the presence, filled with that, and then immediately was released from the gross body and floated off, and I could feel her withdrawn into the higher grade. And that's it, the transition was made. Fascinating as an experience. And then an hour later, or maybe soon after, somebody who had come there noticed and said, "What happened to the glow? There was this glow on the face." You see, what happens soon after a person has left the body, there's a kind of a glow of a certain kind, and people are sometimes looking for that. That was there, and then just after this it had gone. So I said, yes, because she's gone. The glow is still a part of the vital physical, the dense layer close to the physical, still attached to the body, which naturally takes time normally to fade out. But in this case, it had been released just like that. So it's possible for you to intervene, for example, to release. It's possible also for you to actually assist and make help them make the transition, or it can be done by an intervention from above. And then came something very fascinating, and this was that night. That night of the cremation had been done, that evening, and that night in the dream I saw her in the body. I don't go into details, it's not so nice to describe, but it was as if she was on the pyre, and she was saying, but I don't want to be here, leave me, free me from this. And I was telling her, no, but I'm sorry, you have to allow this to dissolve. And I was conscious in that half dream, half awake state that it was not her soul, even her vital body had moved on. It was some dense grade of the physical consciousness, or close to the physical consciousness, which was being dissolved. And so it was necessary, and it was symbolically seen in that image. So what was interesting was there was still this grade, and Mother speaks of the spirit of the form, and it is in reference to that she said it's useful to keep the body for a few days. We will come to a text regarding this maybe on another occasion, or maybe this is the time to do it. Let me just take that, we will digress a bit. So I'm reading from the Mother's description. This is on May 28th, 1960. She says, K left his body. The operation had been extraordinarily, almost miraculously successful. One of those dreadful operations where they extract a part of your body. He was quite all right for 4 days afterwards, then everything went wrong. During the operation and just afterwards, I had simply put the force on him, as I always do in such cases, so that everything would turn out for the best. Then a few days ago, during my japa, a kind of order came, a very clear order, to concentrate on him so that he would be conscious of his soul and be able to leave under the best conditions. So Mother is in her room, he is in his room, and she's got this order to assist him to make the transition. And I saw that the concentration worked wonderfully. It seems that during his last days he was ceaselessly repeating ma, 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 that is mother, 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 even while he was in a semi-coma. And the concentration grew stronger and stronger. So his concentration was growing stronger and stronger. The day before yesterday it became very, very powerful. And yesterday morning, around noon, it pulled me inward. Oh, she's speaking of her concentration on him to help him make the transition. It pulled me inward. He came to me in a kind of sleep, a conscious sleep. So just having left the body. And I even said out aloud, oh, K, by his name. It lasted 15 minutes. I was completely inside as if to receive him. And there is something interesting. When I went down at 2 p.m., I found the family had come to inform me that they had been notified by telephone that he had died at 11:45 a.m. Myself, I saw him come at 12:30. So he was in another city at that point. So you see the outer signs. It's not the first time I've noticed this. The doctors observe all the outer signs, then they declare you dead, but you're still in your body. In other words, he was still in his body. So he had died at 11:45 according to the doctors. She saw him come only at 12:30. So it's probably during this period that people are resuscitated, as they say. It must be during this period, for they have not left their bodies. They are not really dead. The heart may give the appearance of having stopped. So K left his body at around noon, and officially it was at 11:45. 45 minutes later, in other words, that he left. And it takes place very gently, when it's done right. Very gently, smoothly, without any shock. Then she continues. So, this morning they are burning him. When they're in too much of a hurry to burn them, sometimes they burn them alive. They should wait. For there's a consciousness of the form, a life of the form. There's a consciousness in the form assumed by the cells. That takes 7 days to come out. So sometimes the body makes abrupt movements when burnt. People say it's mechanical. It's not mechanical. I know it's not. Okay, this can be a bit distressing to some, but we'll just stay with the description. I know it. I know that this consciousness of the form exists since I have actually gone out of it. Once, long back, I was in a so-called cataleptic state. And after a while still in this state, the body began living again. So she had gone out, as you will remember, when she had gone to find the secret of life and Theon had cut the cord. So technically she was dead, but she had to rebuild the connection. And that is, it was capable of speaking and moving. It was Theon who gave me this training. The body managed to get up and move, and yet everything had gone out of it. Oh, okay, this is a different thing. So she's in a cataleptic state, and she was able to control the body to move, and make it get up and do things. Once everything had gone out, it naturally became cold, but the body consciousness manages to draw a little energy from the air, from this or that. And I spoke in that state. I spoke very well, and besides I recounted all I was seeing elsewhere. So, Mother says, I don't like this habit of burning people very much. I think they do it here, that is in India, apart from entirely sanitary conditions, in the case of people who have died from nasty diseases, here in India, mainly because they're very afraid of all those little entities that come from desires, impulses, things which are dispersed in the air and which make ghosts and all kinds of things. All desires, all attachments, all those things are like pieces that break off. Each one goes its own way, you see. Then these pieces gain strength in the surrounding atmosphere. And when they fasten onto someone, they vampirize him. Then they keep on trying to satisfy their desires. The world, the terrestrial atmosphere, is full of filth. And people here are much more sensitive than in Europe because they are much more interiorized. She's speaking of the Indian space. So they are conscious of all these little entities, and naturally they are afraid. And the more that they are afraid, the more they are vampirized. I think that many of these entities are dispersed by fire. That creates havoc. I knew one person, a boy who died here. He was burnt before he had left. He had a weak heart, and not enough care was taken. That is, they probably should not have operated on him. He was our engineer. He died in the hospital, not a serious operation, an appendicitis. But his heart could not take up its natural movement. But as he was accustomed to going out of his body, I think this is somebody called Chandulal. He was the engineer, if I'm right. But he was accustomed to going out of his body. He didn't know. He even used to make experiments. He would go out, circle around in his room, see his body from outside, observe the difference between the subtle physical and the material physical, etc. So he didn't know. And it's only when they burnt his body, meaning he didn't know that the body had died. So it's only when they burnt the body. I tried to delay the moment, but he was in the hospital, so it was difficult. I was in my room when they burnt his body. And then suddenly I saw him arrive sobbing, saying, but I am dead. I didn't want to die. Why am I dead? I didn't want to die. It was dreadful, Mother says. So I kept him and held him against me to quiet him down. He remained there for years. And whenever we used to have meetings to decide on the construction of something or on repairs to be made, for example, I always felt him there. And he influenced those who were present. He wanted to live again. I managed to give him the opportunity. He was very conscious. The child isn't yet so. So that is, Mother gave him an opportunity to take birth. But she says, people are such fools. They are so ignorant. So there are many important points here. And so this is an example of Chandulal, I think, who stayed for many years in the subtle body because he was too young, he didn't want to leave. The heart gave in because of the surgery, so he was still participating in the construction work because that was still his personality. Mother was aware, but she saw how he was influencing people to tilt things going in the construction direction that he wanted, or which his technical mind had. But the same can happen with the fragments which break off. You see, when people have passed on the strongly formed attachments, desires, etc., they break off and attach to equivalent grades of things. We have discussed this before, but I will take the moment to again repeat. They attach to things. And so in India, we have this idea that you feed the crow and the crow comes to eat. Now, why? What's the idea? The way they say it, doesn't make sense. Oh, the soul is coming to eat. The soul is hungry. You satisfy the soul's desire. No, it's not to do with the soul. These are fragments from the vital. And those fragments of desire which are hanging around, you're trying to dissipate them by allowing them to be exhausted. And they would attach to grades of creatures of similar type, crows being natural entry points. Mother speaks of how even cats or dogs can have an opening to the vital, cats particularly. So the part of the vital could attach with those things and the crow would come to eat. And we had this experience when one of Panditji's earlier sisters had passed on. For 3 days, the crow came and it would caw and wait until something was given, it ate and went. After the 3 days, it never came again. But the third day, I recall, my mother had forgotten to give, and the crow was sat there and cawed until we came and gave. And then after that, it was gone. So these are interesting things, and mother explains the rationale for wanting to quickly, dissolve the body. But she makes this phrase, the more people are afraid, the more they are vampirized. And I've had this experience, I've seen this many times when somebody has passed on, and if it's somebody close, certain elements of the desire nature of the person, so to say, wanting to attach to whoever is open to that person or is particularly attached through sentimental feeling. It's interesting. Now, I've read this in literature of people, that's common literature, even non-spiritual literature. When people say that often when they come back from a burial, many people find themselves pushed with strong sexual desires. And the reason for that would be this, that something of that energy is looking for points of entry if those things belong to that person's vital body, which has just been, so to say, fragmented, or the pieces hanging around. But the idea of cremation is to dissolve those formations as quickly as possible. So that's what mother says, these things which are dispersed, and she says the world, the terrestrial atmosphere is full of filth. It's a very strong statement, and this is the reality though. And the people who sense it, of course, the fear creates the link. You have to consciously dissolve that fear. But the point she makes is, these entities are dispersed by fire. That creates havoc to these formations, especially things of a very close physical grade. Those get dissolved. So I somewhat digress. This is a text I had planned to touch on another day, but since it links to the question, coming back to Subodh's question, yes, those rituals were intended to assist this dissolution, and on the other side, to help the person who is now just outside the body and struggling to move on. And that's why you have the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Egyptian Book of the Dead, which are all about go on, move on, there are higher realms. I've mentioned this before, but I'm repeating. Those who have a clear spiritual opening and a turn of the consciousness to the divine at the time of transition, and if they've prepared, there is immediately from the other side the link that comes to help make the transition. Often you will find in people who are on the brink of transition, they see their loved ones coming to greet them. Or they make the transition and they meet on the other side people whom they have loved, their grandparents, parents, others, who have come to help them across. Not always, but often. And sometimes it's strange that it's not possible because that grandparent has already reincarnated. And this is explained with a text which I saw, I think it was perhaps from maybe that conversation Jürgen had, which I just saw recently, where they saw one of these helper beings, a being of light, coming and then taking on the form of someone known to this person, so that the person would be more accepting of their help to move on from the dark region to the light. So they actually take the form needed to assist you. It may be deceptive, but that's the only way in which you would accept and trust to allow to go across. And there are many cases where people, having made the transition, they are so racked by the guilt that comes from the religious programming that they're unable to let go, unable to free themselves from the attachment to that dark zone, and so unable to make the transition. And this is the observation Mother made when she tried to help even several people, even from the ashram. She said when she went there, they were so lost in their own thing that they couldn't even recognize her. And that's sad. That means the real work was not done even while they were in the body. Remember always, the real work is here, which allows you to be in the state that you are here when out of the body. She also tried to help Kennedy, and she said about Kennedy when he had just been assassinated, he was so lost in his bubble of the conception of his Christian beliefs that he was too closed and would not allow himself to be helped to make that transition. So all of this is to highlight the importance or utility of these things. But if you are conscious and in the preparation you link yourself open to the help of the Divine Mother, immediately you have the help, and this passage that the Mother has built up, and with a guardian being who comes to help you across, you skip all these intermediate zones and are directly pulled straight into the zone of light, the highest zone that you are able to access in your current evolutionary state, and you're freed from having to pass through these intermediate levels. So again, a lot depends. First, to Subodh's question, should you do those? It depends. If your family wants to do it, let them. If you are conscious of the person and their spiritual life, and you feel that they've already made the transition, maybe it's not needed. If you feel there are portions attached, you could use those means or consciously help to dissolve. So there are many ways. It depends on you, depends on the person, depends on the demand of the family. But you understand these were occult means for such things. But if the person has already reincarnated, no need to attach yourself to these forms. There are often these, Shraddha is a practice you do, sometimes they do every year for all your ancestors. They have all reincarnated, you don't need to. But the idea is, if someone is stuck, and sometimes they could be stuck for years, well, you're doing what you can to help them go. So a lot depends on your own consciousness and what you feel in relation to those things. What I would suggest, if your family needs strongly to do such rituals, let them do it once. If you have made the conscious prayer, linked the person to the Divine Mother's help, rest assured, and you will feel the difference. Go through those rituals once and then drop it. The better way is for you also to move on, or you could use those rituals as a way to move on if you are very attached. So see what works. We go to the next question, and the next two questions together.
From Prema, please, any advice on how to eliminate fear of encountering dangerous entities in out-of-body experience without being able to go into high levels? And from Trinetra, please explain more about awakening the inner sight.
Okay, and they're quite different, but we put both together because we have a text from the Mother which discusses some of this, but much more than this. But quickly, to take Prema's question about encountering dangerous OBE entities in out-of-body experience, I will perhaps leave this for Geminus to answer when he comes next online. But the simple response to this would be, your fear is coming purely from lack of knowledge of it, ignorance of something which you have never experienced. So automatically all the worst things you could imagine are there. The reality would be, very likely when you find yourself out of the body, you'll find it so beautiful and the domain so wonderful that you might say, oh, this is wonderful to be here. So a lot depends on what grade of consciousness you live. If you live in a depressed, dark, dull, heavy, inebriated state, well, that domain you will enter will correspond to what you're living in, and then it won't matter. They're not dangerous because you're living with them anyway in your daily life, in your physical body. So it's not a problem. If you live already in a consciousness which is free of this and naturally open to the higher light and its influence, then you don't need to worry because that's the grade into which you will naturally tend to experience things. So The better way to approach this whole question of out-of-body experience is let all past conceptions fade out. Do not go with any preconception. Rather, assume that and even ask for this before you start any concentration or practice or relaxation. Invoke the mother's protection around you and into the entire space, and ask her to lead your journey and your exploration and lead you to the best experiences. And then, with the trust and faith in the divine help and protection, go without fear. But this you must practice in your daily life then, and only then naturally it will be your state as you slide into sleep or into other experiences. Let this be your constant state that you live by in normal life. So about awakening of the inner sight, we will see the text that comes, and the mother will now elaborate on many of these, both of these questions in some detail. So there are two passages from the mother which are linked, and the second passage relates to a discussion in the first. The first passage is about entering and experiencing what is called today popularly in the theosophical vocabulary, the Akashic records. Mother speaks of it as the earth memory. So that description she made, this is in a conversation which was in 15th February 1951, which I will keep for next time, because today we have less time. We have about half an hour left, and I don't want to lose the main point of the discussion. So we'll keep this for next time, but it is about this that a question is asked. And this is from a text of 19th February 1951. In the next class, somebody asked the mother, to be able to enter the earth memory consciously, a discipline is needed. Mother had said that. What discipline? So mother takes this up now, and it becomes a topic for not only this but also out-of-body experience. And this is something very beautiful, and I want you to read really dwell in what she describes here, because also for Prema's question, it will help to free from your fear when you read what mother has to say about the out-of-body experience. And so right now, set all your preconceptions aside, and with a joyous trust in the mother, let her words lead you. So what does she say? First, about this discipline, about entering the earth memory. She says, a discipline much more difficult than the discipline of yoga. It is an occult discipline. So first we understand occult discipline is more difficult than yoga. But as a result of yogic growth practice discipline, you will naturally have certain experiences which are belonging naturally to the occult training, and in a way which is spontaneous and effortless and true and real. Unlike the energy spent in occult training, which then you're kind of losing the opportunity for so much more that could be done through the yoga. But what we are going to do, and especially from the out-of-body experience, we're going to kind of weave it into the yoga practice itself as much as possible, and not treat it as a separate discipline. So, mother says now, how to do this? What is the occult discipline for earth memory? And there's an element which is out of body. So we will treat it as part of the sadhana. She says, first of all, one must learn to go out of one's body consciously and to enter into another more subtle body. It depends on the grade that you want to access the memory. So according to that grade, you will go to that grade of the body or consciousness. Second thing from there, to use one's will to go where one wants to go. Never to fear, and sometimes to face unexpected and even terrible things. Now, why would you face unexpected and terrible things? Because you're going to go into the earth memory. There you will find unexpected and terrible things, naturally, because you're going back into that memory, isn't it? And of that grade. So you don't know what you will find. It doesn't mean that out of body will have necessarily those things. So understand the context of the unexpected and terrible things. Never to fear, and sometimes to face unexpected, and sometimes, not always, unexpected and even terrible things. To remain calm. To develop the mind's visual sense. So that was Trinetra's question. Awakening of inner sight. But here she's saying you must develop the mind's visual sense. To accustom one's mind to be altogether peaceful and quiet. You know, the list is long, and I could continue like this for hours, mother says. Now you'll see in what she has described all the things which you need to do as part of the overall discipline for entering the earth memory. Of all these, you will find so many are common with the basic spiritual practice. So accustom the mind to be altogether peaceful and quiet. It's something so basic that you would want even without a spirituality. People who are in business turn to meditation just for this mental quiet, isn't it? Or for problem solving and so on. And you would want to do that because with a quieter mind, you'd be able to access so much more of the inner and higher experiences. Never to fear and sometimes face unexpected things, to remain calm, etc., is all based on a deeper equality from a deeper, wider, freer poise of consciousness. Again, it's something you would want to do to set that base of equality, which then naturally would extend into this. So the only two things which are not immediately of your obvious yogic focus are to be able to move out of the body consciously and enter into the subtle body and use the will to move around. And the other is develop the mind's visual sense. So both of these things now we will touch upon as we proceed. And we are also part of the overall theme that we're covering. So the thing to do with the mind's visual sense, I think she will come to that shortly. So this is the first step. And then Mother asks, who among you has had the experience of going out of the body? Going out and knowing about it. Because in a sense all of us go out in dream state or at night. Going out and knowing about it. I do not even speak of doing it at will, for that is another stage. So someone replies, once I went out of my body but got back into it immediately. Mother, you did not take the opportunity of going for a little walk, did you? Well, you are not inquisitive. So her first suggestion is, well, you please explore. Please be inquisitive. That's the suggestion. Someone asks, how can one know that one has gone out of the body? Mother, you see it immobile on your bed. There are other means of knowing also. Someone says, I went out of the body under the effect of chloroform. I saw my body on the table and I witnessed the operation. Mother, so too, I knew quite a remarkable clairvoyant. One day, she had to undergo an operation and she was chloroformed. She went out of her body. Suddenly, she began to see what was going on in the minds of the people who were there. She had the habit of talking, even while asleep. And she began to speak out quite aloud. She said that so and so had worries, that another had a problem to solve, and that its solution was such and such a thing. So being in that state, obviously you had access to a wider knowledge. Now this is very similar to people who have had near-death experiences. They are not only able to, in the subtle body, see other people's thoughts, but also access insights which are obvious in that state, which is more free. So I recall this is documented by Dr. Raymond Moody in his Life After Life, both the book and the DVD, where he documents one person who obviously going out was in a much wider consciousness. Then he moves around, sees people and things, and he goes to a place where it was one of his brother or relative, and they had a baby who was crying. So approaching the baby in the out-of-body state, it was telepathic. So he knew what the baby was thinking, why he was crying. And the baby was crying because there was pain, because the joint on the hip had been slightly twisted. And so he told the baby, don't worry, they will take care, there's no point crying, they don't understand why you're crying, so just become quiet and stop crying for a while. And I will tell them to set it right or something like that. The child stops crying and he sees this, because the child can receive his communication. It's a telepathic communication at that point. Soon after he is pulled back. It was a near-death experience. He was in surgery, comes back, remembers all this, narrates all this. And they confirm, yes, unusually that child stopped crying suddenly for no reason. And when he said that there was a twist in the hip, they did an examination. They found that it was twisted and they set it right. And after that, the child had no more problem. So here's a very good example of how one just picks up and can communicate in that out-of-body state. So Mother has narrated this, even solution to problems. This was an exceptional case. It could be Madame Thion, I don't know if it was, but when she says it was a remarkable clairvoyant, it could have been her or it could be someone else. Mother says this was an exceptional case. That happens only to gifted persons, and there are not many of these. But the number of persons who remain conscious under chloroform is greater than one thinks. But generally, when one wakes up from chloroform, one feels pretty uneasy and remembers but vaguely his experiences outside the body. Is there anyone here who has fainted suddenly, as if by accident? You see your body, don't you? And you ask yourself, but what is it doing there in that ridiculous position? And you rush back into it. That happened to me once in Paris. I had been treated to a good dinner. I mentioned this last time, but we'll read it. And I went to a conference hall, I believe. There were many people. It was very hot. I was standing there with a good dinner in my stomach, and suddenly I felt ill at ease. I told the person who was with me, I must go out immediately. Once outside, it was in Trocadero Square. I fainted away completely. I saw my body there stretched out, and I found it so ridiculous that I rushed into it and I gave it a good scolding, saying, "You must not play such tricks with me." She says, many people faint like this and see themselves. There is one condition for this. So it's interesting. You may faint, but you may not see yourself. To be able to see yourself, there is one condition for this. The organ of sight in the subtle physical body or in the most material vital must be developed. That's the condition. Now notice, not everybody has this organ of sight developed in that grade of the body. How do you develop it? She will tell you shortly, but understand that it's not naturally present for all. So you may be out of the body and you may not see. I've read again, now I don't recall the source of who it was, describing how sometimes going out of the body, you're in this as if haze. And then you as if force yourself to see, and there's as if a piercing movement where gradually things begin to become clear, and then you begin to see. So there's almost like an activation of the sight capacity in that. It may not happen to everybody, but I'm just pointing out that depending on the grade and the grade's ability to perceive, if it's not so developed, well, your perception is not so strong, particularly at layers which are very close to the gross physical. That's why she's speaking of this here. When you go out in the vital body in the higher ranges, perhaps this is not an issue. But coming to this layer, she says, the organ of sight in the subtle physical or in the most material vital must be developed. And now she explains, I must tell you that this kind of capacity may come spontaneously without effort. One may be a born clairvoyant. They are not necessarily very intelligent people. Their vital consciousness may be mediocre, but they are born clairvoyant. It is not a sign of a great development. It comes from something else, from a capacity of the parents, of past lives, etc. But if you are not born clairvoyant, and if you do not carry in you the other extreme, I mean a psychic being wholly conscious and fully developed, which leads its own independent life in the body, and you want to learn to see and have visions, then it is a very long, a very slow discipline, and there are very few people who have the necessary patience and endurance to go to the end of the training. It is interesting, but it is not essential. One can do without it. It is the same as with dreams. If you can develop this capacity, you can make your life more rich. It can make your consciousness progress more quickly. Now, there's more which follows, the question changes, but I'm going to pause here and review because some very important statements have been made and which have massive implications for both the perception as well as the out-of-body experience. So what she's saying about being born clairvoyant applies equally to out-of-body experience. So I'm going to reread a few lines and you must really drill this in. And it will make a lot of sense when you hear what you have read also, but what Mark and Geminus have been saying, that it is a skill. It does not require any development of consciousness to have an out-of-body experience. And the same would apply to this subtle sight also. She says, they are not necessarily very intelligent people, the clairvoyant. One may be born clairvoyant. They are not necessarily very intelligent people. Their vital consciousness may be mediocre, even you don't need a vital development. But they are born clairvoyant, that's all. So it's more like other circumstances, other things. Again, she says, it is not a sign of a great development. Comes from something else, from a capacity of the parents, of past lives, etc. So I know of cases where somebody who had an out-of-body experience naturally from childhood had a child who also has out-of-body experiences naturally from childhood. So certain tendencies as if inherited by an imprint of consciousness. Just as you catch a pattern of behavior from a parent by identification, so too something of this tendency may come into the temperament, imprinted into the gross physical, subtle physical and physical vital ranges of consciousness, because a lot of that material you draw from your parents. And if in that material a habit has been imprinted, that habit could be transmitted, just as a habit of anger is transmitted hereditarily. That's all there is to it. Or from past life, and something of the tendency has been retained in the soul's memory or tendency. So again, no special development needed, or no special development is represented by such capacities. And this we must really, really remind ourselves. So two things, implications. When you see somebody doing it, it's no big deal. Doesn't mean, oh, they are very developed spiritually. No, need not be. They could be. If that is, all the better. If not, doesn't mean anything. But the other implication is, we, you and I, can have those experiences, no big deal. It doesn't require spiritual development. So this is the point which both Mark and Geminus and others have been saying. It's a skill. It doesn't require any special development in your consciousness. But if you have a development of consciousness, then you can have all these experiences and more easily accessible. So that's the other extreme she's speaking of. So if you're not born clairvoyant, and if you do not carry in you the other extreme, which is of a fully developed psychic, and now you're in between, you have neither the born advantage nor the psychic development, then it is a very long, very slow discipline, and there are very few who have the necessary patience and endurance to go to the end of the training. But if you do have the patience and the endurance, the slow, long discipline can get you to that development easily. And it's not very difficult. You'll find Mother describes this. It just takes long, perhaps endurance. Mother describes this. You as if extend your awareness almost on a physical level and try to feel and see what it's like just outside your room. So one of the practices given is you visualize yourself and try to make the visual as detailed and complete as possible. You open the door, you step out, observe all the things, imprint, as if you're creating a visual. Go and somewhere nearby, observe what's happening, feel. While you're imprinting, you're creating, but there's a point where in the act of creating, the perception grows. And as this perception grows, something begins to awaken, as if you feel, oh, there's already something even before I can create. Or as I create, I sense something else. And you pay more attention to that. And that's how the perception begins to grow of that grade at which you have, so to say, projected yourself. It's what Mark described earlier as a part of your, I think he used energetic matter, which is projected. We will use the word subtle physical, or the vocabulary Mother uses. It could be either the subtle physical or the most material vital, the part of the vital which plugs into the physical. So that portion extended, you can actually sense and feel physical things. How far can it go? In principle, according to your training and capacity, it could go very far, including the other side of the earth. But there is a physical capacity to extend, which will also grow. But nearby, close by, in familiar places, generally it's easier. But this is the slow, long discipline in between. Now, let's assume we are not born with the capacity. We don't have the patience for the slow and long discipline. And so we come to the other extreme. And this is for me more important, because this is the approach we are taking in our discussion here. As part of our spiritual evolution, if we can develop a certain, let's say, turn of consciousness, then certain experiences become more easily, naturally accessible. They may not be our priority. They may be incidental to our overall spiritual evolution. But And again, I quote from the mother, if you can develop this capacity, it can make your life more rich, it can make your consciousness progress more quickly. So it is with that intention that we are looking towards out-of-body experience, or even this kind of what she has described as perception. To me personally, the subtle perception is not so important. The out-of-body experience as such is more valuable, because in the subtle perception you've projected a certain grade of consciousness, but what you gain from it apart from the specific knowledge, you've not shifted state. But in an out-of-body experience, you have necessarily disconnected from the gross body enough that you're in a liberated, freer state of consciousness, which as an experience not only allows you to perceive the world, know yourself more deeply, more intimately, more completely, but that you can then bring back into the gross body and assist through the memory and through the imprinting of that for the gross body itself to now participate in this freer, wider consciousness. Again, you don't need an out-of-body experience for this. The same you could attain from the deep meditation. But deep meditation really, where you disconnect from the gross body, enter into deeper and higher states, experience those states more and more completely, and then infuse it back into the gross body. But the same principle would apply. You go out of body, you have a beautiful experience, you come back, you forget, not very useful. Like the meditation, you went into a deeper, higher state, you come back, you've lost it all, not very useful, except there's an afterglow. But if you came back slowly, infusing the grade of consciousness, the memory of the experience, one of the things which naturally happens in the out-of-body state, the sense of wideness and the sense of extension in time and space are naturally more free. Assuming you go into naturally more higher ranges, there is an underlying sense of infinity or eternity that you grow familiar with. On the return, you could infuse that into the surface layers of personality. If you did that, it would have a spiritual benefit. And that's what she means. It can make your consciousness progress more quickly. Now, without an out-of-body experience, one could still enter equally, almost as intensely, the same experience of infinity and eternity. Having had that, then one would slowly infuse into the body, you would have the same benefit. But it would require a deep state of meditation and concentration. And that's why I'm highlighting the practice of the descent of peace, because if you develop the ability to be centered in your subtle physical body first, from there all these experiences become accessible with or without out-of-body. My personal journey, I can say, as you can see, the out-of-body experience has not been present. And yet all of these experiences were accessible. And even at a point where I was completely unready in my own effort. It was with my teacher, MP Pandit, sitting with him, just open and receptive, with this heart open with love, and he just infused an experience, a state of consciousness, and I would find myself pulled into it, and that was it. But because it was so naturally received, I did not, or nobody told me, I had to consciously extend it. It did happen because intuitively I did that extending. But afterwards, I did not work to fix in the more material layers. There was even a certain stage over a few weeks and months when a certain experience of the psychic presence had been built up to a point where I was walking on the road and I'm looking at the beauty of this whole creation, immersed, infused with this, let's say, psychic glow. And I see something happening and I'm unable to speak because so deeply interiorized. And I watched with wonder this lady cycling by, a mat falls, and a moment before it happens, I know it's going to happen. And a moment before it happens, I know there's a boy walking by who's going to take the mat. And I know I should tell her, hey, your mat has fallen, but it's so beautiful, I just watch. And I watch her turn and go away. And I watch this boy pick up the mat and walk away. And it's so beautiful, I keep walking and I go on. And something in me still says, but I should have told her. I'm unable to, because the degree of interiorization was such that, and the experience so complete, I did not have at that time the understanding of how to bridge it, link it to the surface layers. It didn't matter. But my point was, I did nothing on my part. It was given. And so this can happen to you. It is given to you, or you can do it consciously, which was the later part of my journey. Later, I had to recover those things. consciously shift, interiorize your awareness, recover the subtle physical body awareness. From there you open to these experiences, deepen, immerse in them, and as completely as possible, and then infuse slowly on the return the gross physical body, until with eyes open, getting up, walking, you can hold the full intensity of that experience. This, if you can do, and you've built this, the out-of-body experience would only allow a greater amplification in intensities of the same experiences. But the work would still be similar. That's why, reading from the mother, it is interesting, but it is not essential. She's speaking of the sight or even the out-of-body. One can do without it. It is the same as with the dreams, which she speaks of being conscious in the dreams and then bringing back. But if you can develop this capacity, it can make your life more rich. It can make your consciousness progress more quickly. So we're coming back to this other second option, which says, if you're not born clairvoyant and you don't want to make this struggled effort, so what is the other extreme? By that she says, I mean a psychic being wholly conscious and fully developed, which leads its own independent life in the body. Okay, so we perhaps don't have that, but we are already tending in that direction. There's already a strong psychic influence, otherwise you would not find these discussions helpful. Very simple. That's why numbers will always be small for this kind of content. And we have to accept that. That's the nature of the path. Those who feel strongly drawn, those who feel that their life is meant for a higher cause, it's already a sign that your psychic influence is strong and something of your psychic being is, let's say, pushing, or its influence, putting out its influence. And this is your reference. So, I won't say your psychic being is wholly conscious and fully developed, which leads its own independent life in the body. Maybe not yet there, but you're tending in that direction. And with that, knowing that at least the out-of-body experience or these deeper experiences accessible in meditation do not require any special capacity of development, but can be made a means for your development, we move forward. So we come now to another question which is asked. You say there are two categories of people, those who are asked to meditate and those who are not asked. How to know to which category one belongs? This is again from a conversation the mother had from 21st April 1929, from which she had been reading. And she says that we are not here to just follow blindly a discipline. We want to concentrate on the divine in all that we do, at all times, in all our acts, in every movement. I'm reading from that passage. And she says there are some here who have been told to meditate, but also there are others who have not been asked to do any meditation at all. They've not been asked to. They could if they wanted, but they don't want to, and so they're not asked. But it must not be thought that they are not progressing. They too follow a discipline, but it is of another nature. To work, to act with devotion and an inner consecration is also a spiritual discipline. So she speaks of two groups within the ashram, those who work or are meant to work and act with devotion and inner consecration, and there are others who have this but also are asked to meditate. Obviously those who have this and meditate have a greater advantage, but those who don't meditate but have only this or are building towards this, it's a slower process. And there were people who actually proudly say this. I remember Udarda would proudly say, I never meditated. And I told mother, I don't know how to meditate. And mother said, did I ever ask you to meditate? Ha ha ha, he would laugh. But then she gave him a reference. She said, simply remember me at all times in the midst of all your activities. And so it is this form, with devotion, with inner consecration, everything you do. But he was not interested, very simply. And which was fine, this was his way. But when somebody has come to a certain grade of development and feel that no, I can accelerate, the meditation becomes the means by which you enter in concentration on those inner and higher states and work now actively to accelerate. So, how do you know which category you belong? Mother said, you are told. So, questioner, so can we ask you? Mother, certainly, I am here for that. Imagine how many people didn't bother to ask even this question. It was too easily given. That's why we did not value. We did not value this. And I've said, perhaps the text is longer, but let's just take the time. I think you will not mind if we take a little longer than usual for this. I remember I had once a dream experience, and it was because it was just after I had been in some close interaction with Llewellyn Vaughan-Lee, of whom I have spoken before. He's a Sufi master, teacher in his lineage. And I had a dream vividly where I was in this large building, and I was, so to say, like a tourist guide taking a group of people to show them certain spaces. And it was a building with many, many rooms. And I was showing people around, and then suddenly the focus shifted, and I was aware that there was one hall where Llewellyn was going to have an interaction with his students. And at the last minute he changed the hall and had all the students go to a different hall. Obviously there was a reason for that. And in that dream I explained, or I was saying this or explaining this, there's a difference in the path. I said, in our path the things are given too easily, everything is given, and so people don't value. But in his path he gives things to people as they grow, and only as much as is given, only as much is given as you're ready for, so that people value and make full use of what is given. And I remembered at that point that in one of the interactions where I was there he was interacting with his students, he chastised some of the students. To one particular one he said, I have come to know that you have not been making your necessary efforts, and if you don't do this, if you don't make the basic efforts, then you don't need to come to these meetings, because we're not here to just entertain, we're here to do some serious work. He said this very plainly, and they were given a chance. Somebody was given a last chance and said, either you make the effort or you don't come here. You have some other path you can take, it's different, but this is not your place. So that kind of strict engagement with the students, carrying them on the path, and of course taking full responsibility for their journey. That is, well, I would even say, was the case in the early years of the ashram, where Sri Aurobindo and the mother would only allow those who were ready for this kind of an intense concentration. Later, when the other families came and there was this big mixture and, so to say, many gradations formed, the mother could not be as strict. She was with a few who were, let's say, in a more central focus, but it could not be for all. And she says this, with the little children, you couldn't expect them to do sadhana. So automatically certain things got diluted and so on. But I'm pointing this out because it's a very common mistake we make. The opportunity is given so easily, one does not even bother to ask or to make use of the opportunity until sometimes it's too late. And I've said this to people in the ashram. I said, you've been here 30 years. What have you done in terms of growth? It was a provocative question. I've said this occasionally. And I said, if you don't do this, the minimum, you have met the mother, if you don't have a minimum of psychic realization or self-realization, you've wasted your life with the opportunity that you had been given. And so it's a question of priority. Some say, yeah, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm happy with what I'm doing. Fine. Stay with that. It's not a problem. But then it's a choice one would make, whether you would engage with that or not. And so mother made that choice all the time. She said, certainly I'm here for that. Can we ask you? Yes, I'm here for that. Now the next question is again out of body. At times when one goes out of the body follows the part which goes out. Mother's reply, you are speaking of a somnambulist, but that is quite another thing. That means that the part which goes out, whether a part of the mind or the vital, is so strongly attached to the body, or rather the body is so attached to this part that when this part decides to do something, the body follows it automatically. In your inner being, you decided to do a certain thing, and your body is so closely tied to your inner being that without thinking of it, without wanting to do it, without making any effort, it follows and does the same thing. Note that in this matter, the physical body has capacities it would not have in the ordinary waking condition. For instance, it is well known that one can walk in dangerous places where one would find it rather difficult to walk in the waking state. Like, for example, a very narrow strip on the edge of a wall and things like that, where the balance would be difficult in your waking state, you easily do in the somnambulist state. The body follows the consciousness of the inner being, and its own consciousness is asleep. For the body has a consciousness. All the parts of the being, including the most material, have an independent consciousness. So here again we are coming to very deep, precise knowledge. This is something which is not understood, and even many people who have out-of-body experiences do not know this or do not understand the full scope of their being. They have only interesting experiences in the out-of-body projection, almost like tourists. They come, do things, etc. They narrate. So a lot of literature and videos out there are of this kind. Doesn't have much spiritual value other than the curiosity. But here's a deep insight. Every grade has its independent consciousness. So she says, all the parts of the being, including the most material, have an independent consciousness. Hence, when you go to sleep dead tired, when your physical body needs rest absolutely, your physical consciousness sleeps, while the consciousness of your subtle physical body, or your vital, or your mind, which does not sleep, it continues its activity. But your physical consciousness is separated from the body. It is asleep in a state of unconsciousness, and then the part which does not sleep, which is active, uses the body without the physical consciousness as intermediary and makes it do things directly. So here's something so fascinating, actually two fascinating things. First, she speaks of physical, subtle physical, vital, mental. Now one could say even within that there might be finer gradations, but for the moment let's look at these three. Because for out of body, again, these would be, so to say, three broad references for experience. But each of these has its own consciousness. The reality is, when you are in a dream state, your physical body consciousness, your vital, your subtle physical, vital and mental, each on its grade, it's doing its thing. Even when your physical body consciousness is unconscious, it might have some restless activity. It could be purely mechanical, of repetition of things done in the day, etc. And often it is this which will be registered in the brain. Your subtle physical, if it is sufficiently formed and individualized, would have its own kind of gradation and registration of memory dreams. Your vital similarly, your mental similarly, and there could be parts of your consciousness which are higher, and for each of these grades there may be parts which are inner or outer gradations, layers, and each could have its own dream registrations. To the extent those parts have been individualized, organized, integrated with some center, ideally the psychic, or at the very least your intellect, your surface mind, to the extent they are integrated, you will be able to recall those as dream, or you will have just some vague impression. To the extent those are not even formed enough to have a conscious full dream, you just have impression of restless activity of a grade which will remain. I've shared before this experience of waking up at one time because of a physical discomfort, and I woke up and I was at that time remembering the dreams. I could recall 3 dreams, and when I followed each of the 3 dreams, each ended with the memory of the physical tug pulling me out. And that's when I realized I had been dreaming on 3 different levels. One was closest, one was less close, one was really far, vague, but it was in a higher grade, although simultaneous. So often in waking up you will say, last I had this dream, then that was before, that was before. Sometimes true. Sometimes it is simply that they were of higher grades, so they felt like before, because on coming to the physical brain, it got rearranged, because your physical brain is incapable of triple levels. So this is just to remind you of what Mother is describing here, just in passing, something very rich and important. Each of these, with the physical body consciousness asleep, each of these could engage with the gross physical body and use it to do something. And that's what she was describing in the passage I read in another text earlier. That she was able to control her body. Going into a cataleptic trance, she was able to access the body consciousness and make it speak. Now it's a process one can develop even when an out-of-body state with your vital body out there, to build the link that allows you to narrate what is happening as you wander with your physical body speaking. Interesting. And it can be done. It's not too difficult. But it takes time. You have to build that. So we come back to the text. The part which goes out uses the body without the physical consciousness as intermediary and makes it do things directly. So obviously at that point, because you're not bound to the physical consciousness's beliefs and limitations, the higher consciousness with its greater freedom can make the body do things which it could not do. Including, as you will recall, Madame Alexandra David Neal narrating to the mother how in a state of deep meditation she was walking in the forest. On the return she had to cross a stream and she didn't know how she had got across, and most likely she had walked on the water. But in this state it would be natural, it would be effortless, because a higher grade is using the body by its terms, by its principles. So that's why she says, that is why you do fantastic things, because you do not see them physically, you see them in a different way. And she's not elaborating. You see, the mother has so much she can tell you. It would go on for hours and hours, but she's just giving you a few snippets and sometimes elsewhere something. And when you bring it together, you understand the full scope of what she's communicating in a few words. Then somebody asks, it is said that somnambulism is due to a serious preoccupation and cares. Is it true? Tartini composed a sonata in this state, and when he got up in the morning, he wrote down the whole thing. Questioner. Mother's reply, somnambulism is not always due to preoccupations and cares. So straight away she is discarding that theory. Yes, there are people who write wonderful things when in a state of somnambulism. That's a separate thing. But Tartini was not a somnambulist. It was in a dream state that he wrote sonatas. So there's a big difference. You are in a, what we have earlier described as this hypnagogic state, or still higher ranges, maybe you even tap into higher ranges from which you bring it down. The other state is always a little dangerous, meaning the somnambulism. Unexpected things that can happen, an accident to the vital, for instance. Someone asks, how can one be cured of somnambulism? It's not central to our text, which I will come to later, but I think it's good to finish because it relates to peripherally, and we understand certain things relating to our main topic. Mother, simply, quite simply, by putting a will upon the body before going to sleep. One becomes a somnambulist because the mind is not developed enough to break the inner ties. For the mind always separates the external being from the deeper consciousness. Little children are quite tied up. I knew children who were quite sincere but could not distinguish whether a thing was going on in their imagination or in reality. So the mental body, vital body are so closely tied that the mind seeing and the body seeing are mixed up. For them, the inner life was as real as the external life. They were not telling stories, they were not liars. Simply the inner life was as real as the external life. There are children who go night after night to the same spot in order to continue the dream they have begun. They are experts in the art of going out of their bodies. In the mental consciousness, of course. Now comes this question, more directly central to our discussion. Is it good to leave the body asleep and go out rambling? Can one go back into the body at any moment one likes? So basically someone's asking, is it good to have out-of-body experiences? So mother's reply, it is dangerous if you sleep surrounded by people who may come and shake you up, believing that something has happened to you. But if you are alone and sleep quietly, there is no danger. So I'm sorry, I must repeat this. Did I say that clearly enough? Should I repeat it? That's a joke. For all those who worry, if you are alone and sleep quietly, there is no danger. And danger would be if you are surrounded by people who may come and shake you up. Hey, what's happening? This fellow is not waking up. I'm called 20 times. I come and wake him up. Hey, there's a danger. If you are alone, you sleep quietly, there is no danger. And then she says, one can get back into the body at any time. And generally, it is much more difficult to remain outside than to get back. as soon as the least thing happens, one rushes back quickly into the body. So again, this will correspond to what we've been hearing from Mark and others and Geminus. Again, her vocabulary is very generic right now. She's looking at two different ranges. As soon as the least thing bit happens, one rushes back. So in the out of body state, something distresses you, whoop, you come back. While you're out of body, some distress potential on the physical body, whoop, you come back. Even somebody approaching the physical body is enough to trigger the return. So she says it's more difficult to stay out than to get back. And you will recall from Mark's book how it describes in the middle of the most interesting experience which he wants to continue, the silver cord tugs. Okay, now time to get back. Who's deciding that? And then he's pulled back. That's it. Now again, a question which would be a fear-causing question. Someone asks, if one goes out of the body leaving it on the bed, can someone else enter it? A question which has been asked before many times. Mother says that can happen, but it is extremely rare, once in 100,000 cases. Someone cannot enter, a human being cannot enter the body of another unless he has quite an exceptional and unique occult knowledge, and in that case he will not do it. But if a human being does not enter, at times there are beings of the vital world who do not have a body and want to have one for the fun of the experience. And when they see that someone has gone out of the body, but he must go out very materially, and is not sufficiently protected, they can rush in to take his place. But it is such a rare thing that if you had not put the question, I would not have spoken about it. Still, it's not an impossibility. So first of all, she said it's so rare, we need not even concern ourselves. But the two conditions under which this might be possible, again with great difficulty, is if you have gone out at a very material level, and second, if you are not protected. Both of these are unlikely to happen for you, so do not worry about this. But it's just, as Mother says, she would not even bother to speak about this. Now she comes to the question which was asked earlier, and there were both the question about the fear as well as somebody had asked about protection from spider structures and so on. So she describes how to protect. And this we should do generally, irrespective of out-of-body experience, so that you'll have a good night, so that you won't have these nightmares and nasty thoughts or energies popping up in your dream state. You should do this as a routine. People who have nightmares of this kind should always protect themselves occultly before going out of the body. So even if you go out of the body, you protect yourself occultly. She's not saying don't go, it's dangerous. She's saying if you go out, protect yourself. It can be done in many ways. The simplest way, one which needs no special knowledge, is to call the Guru, the Divine Mother. Simply. You call the Guru, or if one knows somebody who has the knowledge, to call him in thought or spirit, or to protect oneself by making a kind of wall of protection around oneself. One can do many things, can't one? This can prevent such beings from entering. So very simply, you invoke the presence, surround yourself with it, if possible fill the whole room. Why not the entire flat or house also? But particularly around your space. If there are others around, maybe you don't have. But your space where you are, you create this. There are practices, forms in which you can visualize a light, visualize a white light, etc. People will teach you many things, but essentially they all come down to becoming conscious of the presence and surrounding yourself as a protection. Then, she says, if you have a disposition for exteriorization, and if you follow a yoga, again this is something which you are always asked to protect your sleep. By some contemplation, a mental movement, any movement, there are many ways of protecting oneself. But I think there is no such danger for you. Assume now mother is telling you this. But I think there is no such danger for you. Perhaps not for everybody, but still one would have to be, what are the conditions in which you would be in danger? One would have to be terribly ambitious, terribly insincere for such a thing to happen. One would have to be in relation with truly wicked entities for a being who lives in orderliness and truth will never rush into the body of another. That is an act of disorder and it is not done. So this happens with people who dabble with low-level black magic. to them, because they've built up relationships with these beings, sometimes these beings can actually start playing around, and that's their intention. Even they don't want to take a body, it's too messy for them. They want to just create an influence through which they can play around in human affairs. But none of this applies to us. So let's consciously remove such ideas. I would like you to be free of such negative thoughts, even as a suggestion. It does not apply to you, and we have understood the technology and the circumstances in which anything could in principle happen does not apply to you. And Mother says it herself, I don't think there is any such danger for you. So, now comes the question of the going out. Is it the psychic being which goes out or some other part of the being? Mother. If it is the psychic being which goes out, one would not be aware of it. And the more so as most of the time it is not within you. Why? Because it's not been integrated. It's just a supporting presence. Very few people carry their psychic being within them because the dwelling place is not ready. What goes out is sometimes the subtle physical, which is when one sees one's body stretched out. For the physical vision to remain conscious, it must be a very material part of the being which goes out. One must go out very materially in the subtle physical body or in the most material vital. So there are two things. From the subtle physical to go out, which is generally much more difficult. But what happens normally is in the vital body, in the grade which is the most material part of the vital. So there you can see the physical world, but it's never quite what it is totally physically. And depending on how close you are to the grade, things are slightly different. Or as we saw in the experience of Bruno, that even it can be something as if from the past or some differences in circumstances. So, she continues this. But usually it is the vital which goes out, and still more often the mental being. But when it is the mind which goes out, one is not aware of it at all. For the mind is like the psychic, it is very rarely within you. If you think of something or somebody, one part of your mind is immediately there. The mind is a vagabond. It roves, it comes and goes, it enters and goes out. There are very few people who have organized their mind sufficiently to keep it within them, close packed, and preventing it from gadding about. I think I've read portions of this in some earlier discussion. But you understand here the key point, and we will come back to this again in terms of the out-of-body experience. To the extent you've been able to organize these levels of consciousness within you and individualize them, you have the ability then to be able to exteriorize in an individualized state. But what she is describing here is a non-individualized state. The mind is kind of wandering as if a part projected anywhere, everywhere, at any time. And that's the state in which most of us are as we daydream, for example. We are literally there in a daydream in the mental grade of consciousness. And then here instantly, and there was no clear sense of the projection. If there was an organized mind and the ability to then hold an individuality separated from the body, you could actually project in a mental body in an individualized state. But for that, that must be more formed. At times I seem to go out of my body and see it dead, somebody says. Mother, but that is a mere dream. Probably you did not go out of your body at all. There are people who dream they are dead, but that is of no importance. Now comes, what would you do when you go out of the body? From a spiritual perspective. So someone asks, when one goes out of the body, one must try to rush towards you. I think everybody does that, don't they? She asks Mother. Mother says, not 1 in 100. If you did that, that is, if you rushed towards her, if you did that, very interesting things would happen to you. So she gives an example of what would happen if you went out of the body and went to meet the mother. What would happen? I knew someone in France who used to come to me every evening in order that I might show him some unknown region and take him for a ramble in the vital or mental world. And actually I used to take him there. So this fellow would go out of the body, come to her, she would take him and show these spaces. At times there were others also. At times this person was alone. I showed him how to go out of the body, how to get back into it, how to keep the consciousness, etc. I showed him many places, telling him, there you must take this precaution, here you must do such and such a thing. And this continued for a long time. So why not, I'm pausing on the text, why not we take it in this spirit? We ask the mother's help to help us, to teach us, and to show us these experiences to whatever extent. And so she's telling you, if you did that, she would take you around and show you. And then she says, I do not mean that no one among you comes to me in the night, but there are a very few who do it consciously. Now, many might do it unconsciously also. I remember there was one example of a boy who would be sleeping in the class all the time. He was not attentive, not interested, and sleeping most of the time. So the teacher went to the mother. In those days, at least this teacher was somewhat more conscious. Rather than scolding the boy, he asked the mother, Mother, this is the situation. And mother said to the teacher, I've been told this through a third party, so I don't have exact words. But mother said to the teacher, but every time when he's sleeping, his psychic being is coming to me. So just don't disturb him, let him be. Okay, that's an exception. There are others who sleep out of inertia, and we should be able to distinguish. But the point though is there are many beings who might naturally, unconsciously be drawn and approach her. And some of us might even be doing that if we go to sleep, remembering and feeling closeness with the mother. That would happen naturally. But we are not conscious in an out-of-body state when we do that. You see? So that's the distinction she's making. I do not mean that no one among you comes to me in the night, but there are very few who do it consciously. Generally, you will tell me if I am wrong, but that is my impression. When you go to sleep, and have decided to remember me before going to sleep, it is rather a call than a will to rush to me, as you say. So what do? We go to sleep, we invoke the mother's presence, we say, Mother, come, protect, help me, etc. We call her, we don't go to her. That's the distinction she's making. You are there on your bed, you want to rest, to have a good sleep, remain in a good consciousness. Then you call me, rather than have the idea of going out of the body and coming to see me. That's it, the talk ends there. Interesting. So, at least for those of us who are interested in having the out-of-body experience, we could take this hint and actually say, well, Mother, I call you for the protection, whatever else, and say, and I ask you to help me to go out and take me around and show me things and help me to remember when I come back. And don't worry if in the beginning these things would appear in a dream state even, and it would be a beginning of already something developing. But from there very quickly, and she will help you to develop the fullness of that capacity. Why not, perhaps? And then if you can combine this with the kind of practices which we have already discussed, in particular using the opportunistic method, that is that early morning when you wake up and use that moment without moving a single part of the physical body, simply to float off, roll over or drift off, and that would be the perfect occasion. But in any case, one can have just an overall turn. But do not make the mistake of making this an obsession or tension, because the tensions would prevent it. It has to be a very quiet, still aspiration. Remember the 4 steps of the way Mark taught it. First, complete stasis. Body has to be completely still. Total deep peace with no expectation, no desire, no formulation, no tendencies of any kind of attachments, everything just quiet, withdrawn. Third, no tension of desire, and then a quiet aspiration. And if the first 2 or 3 have been cleared, the quiet aspiration simply takes you floating, so simply. So particularly the first 2 things are easily done in the opportune moment, which is early mornings when you wake up briefly. So all this is, there's a long passage and we have taken a little time, and but I think it's totally worth it, and it completes this topic that Mother has covered in this particular way. We have other passages which we will also touch as we wait for Geminus to join us on one of these days, and he will be joining us whenever things work out most smoothly. But we'll try to take this topic thoroughly. And I'd like to complete it in a way that we don't feel something has been left out. As you can see, even a passage like this is so rich and so complete in what the mother is sharing, and sometimes it's just such nuances that you cannot fully appreciate if you don't have that full background. And that's why the elaborations that we have been going through. I'll just scan through the chat box. Okay, so there are a few questions which would be relevant and we can take them next time. For now, I think this is a good theme and point on which to pause. Remember what Mother said first of all when regarding the going out of the body. And she says, it is only dangerous if you sleep surrounded by people who may come and shake you. But if you're alone and sleep quietly, there is no danger. One can get back into the body at any time, and generally it is much more difficult to remain outside than to get back. And then she says, and again about dangers of other kinds, she again repeats, but I think there is no danger for you. And if you are not terribly ambitious, terribly insincere and aligned to wicked things, you have no problem. And I think all of us are free of those things at least. So we need not worry. And then regarding the movement, she says, someone asks, one must try to rush towards you. I think everybody does that when you go out of the body. Mother says, if you did that, very interesting things would happen to you. I used to take him out. She's speaking of what she did with someone. I showed them how to go out of the body, how to get back into it, how to keep the consciousness. I showed him many places, telling him, there you must take this precaution, here you must do such and such a thing, and this continued for a long time. So generally, she says, when you go to sleep, you decide to remember me before going to sleep. It is rather a call than a will to rush to me. So we can make a choice. Both of these are possible. Some days we might do this, some days we might do that. Or simply hold a quiet aspiration, opening to the Divine Mother, calling her presence as a protection and also as a leader to lead us into the other worlds, help us build the consciousness, build the continuity, and recall the experiences that she might take us to have. And let's all hold this aspiration as we concentrate for a few minutes. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.